Hey Creagears, Robo here and welcome back to a brand new video. You guys have spoken and it seems like you guys want us to do a few more custom amiibos before we go and continue on with the rest of the Octobot King L3GS. So we thought this would be a great moment to finally finish up our Salmon Run Custom Amiibo series with the final few Salmon Lid bosses. And so with that said, we can start on the final 3 customs, with the first one being the Slammin Lid. So we hope you guys will enjoy. For the Slammin Lid, we had to start with the lid itself. This is because the size of the Slammin Lid is highly dependent on the opening at the top of the machine. So, as the first piece of the lid, we started off with some craft paper that I used for both a truncated cone as well as a circle to finish up the top of the lid. We then assembled these using some super glue to first fuse the 2 ends of the truncated cone together, and after that I went along the meeting edge of the 2 pieces to seal them together. After we had done this, I grabbed another piece of 2mm EVA foam and cut a 120mm wide circle from this, with a 100cm wide circle also marked out for the placement of the truncated cone. With these 2 done, I would then cut the circle from the sheet, trim off the edge of the cone, and using some hot glue, I would attach the 2 pieces to one another. Next, I would use a piece of 6mm MDF for the hatch at the bottom of the lid. For this, I used a pattern that we had designed for this project to get the sizes for a protractor, and drew these circles onto the MDF. Once all of these were drawn on, I would then cut out the middle of the pattern onto some more 2mm EVA foam. This would then allow us to make both the raised piece of the hatch and also the grill at the bottom at the same time. But before I could really start to trace these pieces, I first needed to cut out these openings. I did try to cut these out on the foam itself, so I didn't need to cut these out 2 times, but the squishiness of the foam made the lines not straight at all, so this idea was just thrown out the window. But this did mean that we first needed to cut out the paper first. And after that, I used a silver Sharpie to mark out the lights. And using a pin, I marked out each of the spots for all of the holes. This was then repeated with a 3mm hole punch, but only to indent the foam, not to cut through it. After these were all marked, I would then cut out the lights and separate the 2 pieces. I would then superglue the raised piece onto the MDF before I cut out the wood, to make it so while I would sand the chamfer on the edge, I would also apply this to the foam to have it match up with its mating piece. And all the while we did that, I would be able to make the middle and the biggest circle of the Slammin Lid a 180mm wide circle from 5mm EVA foam. And so we cut this out, same as a little 2mm EVA foam piece for the top of the lid for a little extra dimension that we will get back to in a little bit. But first we should really start on the extensions of the base. Since we are going to be making the Slammin Lid and its shield beam, it would get the problem that it would not fit on the standard 50mm wide Amiibo base. So to fix this problem, we will use the same extra grading as we had used on the Steel Eel Custom Amiibo. So for the Slammin Lid, we traced this octagon onto some granny grading and cut this out. After which I'd also prepped some craft paper to make the edges for the grade. For this I would score the paper at our first 5mm mark. After that I would then fold the paper. And finally I would then cut it out at the second 5mm mark. This made for an almost 200mm long strip that I would then cut and glue around the circumference of the octagon. With also a little bit of debating to add some coffee stirring sticks to the base, but in the end we decided not to overclutter it. So next we could finally get back to those promised details that we wanted to add to the top of the lid. Since the Slammin Lid has this very recognizable hammered pattern on the top that I really wanted to add. For this I wanted to use a round stone bit with my Dremel to make these marks. But this would not be possible with just some thin craft paper. That was why we needed to add this little bit of extra thickness with the 2mm craft foam. And so, with the hammer marks added, and this little ring cut from a wooden button set, with a little EVA foam lid to finish the hatch, we've completed the top of the lid. This also means that we can glue the completed top to the center of the lid itself to start assembling the machine. Starting with the top, then we can add the hatch to the bottom. Or at least once we are finished with all of these problems with the super glue. And so, once the bottom is added, we can also add these 3 little screws to their place in between the lights. And with all of the pieces of the lid itself finally done, I can use my heat gun to heat up the foam, giving the center lid its signature curves to the edges. And also immediately heat sealing all of the foam pieces, and so prepping them for painting. Although this heat did make the marks of the hatch disappear a bit, so we had to go over those again with the circle punch. Luckily this was quickly finished, which meant that we could continue with the ladle of the Salmon Lid. So after having halved a wooden bead and having chosen a fitting drill bit to hollow out the bead with, I would then first start with the drill bit, although this didn't work out that greatly, so I followed this up with a little bit of sanding with my Dremel, although this also did not work out the best. So in the end, I did have to go back with a drill bit to finish this. After which I finished up the tool with a 40mm long handle, using, you guessed it, a coffee stirring stick. And finally, we get to the last piece that we still need to make, the shield itself. For this, I have been looking around for a lot of nice long pieces of plastic that I could then curve into the cylinder to use for the shield. But after a while, I actually realized that we can just as easily use an empty bottle for the cylinder. This would even make it that we don't have the seam on the back. So we grabbed this nice straight bottle and used this as the base for the shield. Onto this, we could then add the lines of hot glue to act as the waves of the shield, carefully going down the circumference of the bottle every 15mm to get the desired effect. Then, after all of these lines had solidified, we could then cut out both the top and the bottom of the bottle to get our shield beam. At last, we can make the sculpt of the Salmon Lid itself. Although, since the driver of the Salmon Lid has such an eccentric hairstyle, I thought it would be best to start with that. Also because it actually uses a solid piece. Because for this, I used another halved wooden sphere, to which I then add a layer of epoxy sculpt at the bottom with a little extra stub. This will in turn make it easier to add the hair once we finish up the body. And so we get to actually work on that body. Starting with a cylinder that we make into a cone. The tip of which I then bent over and cut into to make the face and the mouth of the Salmon Lid. This mouth is then opened up more using one of my bowl tools. And once the mouth is made, I then use a pointed silicone tool to sculpt out the gills that grow from the mouth. And some nostrils for the little driver. Then I make two identical spheres into bowls and add these to the face as the eyes of the Salmon Lid. And with these details added, we could then do a little test placement with the driver within the Slammin Lid, even allowing us to add the hair to the body. Then I had to use some more work for the gills since they got a little smooshed during the testing. And next I use my knife and a silicone tool to make the seam line for the pants. And with that done, we can finally start to make the fins from some small balls of clay that I then press into a flat circle. These circles I then squish at one end to make into a thinner half, and this is then followed up with a knife tool to make some indents on both sides of the fins. And finally, I get to smooth the thinner side of the fin onto the body. And this was then repeated for the other fin. Although for this one, we make it so it actually holds the ladle. This does make it a little harder to add the indentations, but in the end, we can still make it work. Holy Zapfish, I completely forgot about the control panel that its left fin holds. Using a little square of 2mm EVA foam with a small piece of metal wire and 3 gems to make into the rounded end of the joystick when combined with that metal wire, and also 2 little buttons. But after a little bit of extra fiddling with the sculpt to get everything into the right position, we can, at last, finish up the sculpting. Starting with a base of black for the lid and the grate, and a white primer for the Salmon Lid. Continuing with this, a silver spray paint followed up by a matte varnish is used on the base. After these were applied, we could then already add the shield to the grate to help this part of the Amiibo further along. With hot glue to glue it to the grate and to also make a seam along the edge to help it stick even more. But now we do have a little problem because of the edge of the grate. Since this makes it sit lower than the Amiibo platform, which in turn will make it harder to place it onto one of our Amiibo holders within the Sockeye Station diorama. So we have to use this little 6mm MDF circle in between the Amiibo platform and the grate to raise it up just a little bit to have it still sit securely within one of the Amiibo holders. Although we need to use this, it does not mean that we can't add some hot glue to it to have it fit even better within the Salmon Lid theme that we use between all of our Salmon Run Amiibos, the transparent green water effect. This will then not only add to the show of the Amiibo, but this will also secure the grate to this raised platform. And while that solidifies, we can do some more dry brushing with some plate metal silver onto most of the lid. Trying not to get too much paint onto the hammer marks that we made on top. But once we get to the EVA foam parts, we are actually required to use a little bit more paint, since even though we add the heat seal and the primer, the foam still needs a little bit more paint to get the same coverage as some other smooth pieces. But after the plate metal silver has dried, we can then finish up the metallics with a gunmetal grey for the raised bottom. Then we did forget to add the straps before we actually started to paint. So this little strap of 2mm EVA foam can luckily still be glued to the body. After which, we can finally start to add the Salmon Lid grey to the rest of the body. Next, we used a dark red for the inside of his mouth, plus the buttons and the joystick. And a few layers of jungle green is then added to his pants. Then a black is added to the straps. And after that, and some dental work with some teeth from white craft foam, we then added an orange for the iris, combined with another bit of black for the pupils. Then we can finally mix an orange with a red for the paint that we use for his awesome coupe of hair. Then, after having done so much of the body, we have to do a few more things to the lid itself. Like adding a bit of rushed orange to some of the edges for just a little bit more detail to the mostly flat lid. Followed up with a goblin green for the base of the lights. Which we then finish up by mixing some white with this goblin green to make an illuminated center for each of the lights. After which we then only have this Salmon Lid logo to add to the hatch with some new white paints. But before we're closing off this amiibo, I did want to add a little bit more hot glue to the inside of the cabin as some water within the Slammin Lid. And while that dries, we can also add a little bit more extra detail courtesy of a dark red to the bottom of the hair for shadow effects. And this same red can then also be used for the grooves on top of the hair, for just a little bit more extra visibility. And so we can finish this off with our good old trusty transparent green paint for the hot glue, not only within the cabin, on the ladle and around the hatch, but also on each of the waves within the shield. And then all of these details are finished off with a coat of gloss varnish. Not only on all of the transparent green details, but also on the body of the Salmon Lid itself. And so, with all of that painting done, we can at last add the beam to the underside of the Slammin Lid. Well, either way, with this we can officially announce that the Slammin Lid Custom Amiibo is finished. Hey Creagears, Robo here, and we hope you enjoyed this first one of the final Salmon Run Amiibos. We now only have a few more of these left, although we did realize that we did not actually make plans for one of the unique bosses from one of the special waves, the Mothership. Mostly because that would be an interesting one to make fit onto an Amiibo base. But would you guys like us to actually still try and make her into an Amiibo? Especially with all of her little tunics? Leave a comment below if you guys would like to see that. But while you guys do that, we still have to get going on the rest of the Amiibos. So, that's going to be all from us for now. Keep those creative gears turning, and we will see you guys in the next video.